Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We are going to be getting started shortly. Congressman Conyers is en route, but we have some distinguished guests with us today, and we don't want to wait too long so we can start this discussion. I do want to recognize some important folks who are in the audience and who also will bring remarks. But before I do that, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Mena Demise. I'm the Vice President of Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. This is the first time that we are partnering with Congressman Conyers on the Judiciary Brain Trust. He has obviously a long legacy of work that he's done and leadership in this space, but we are really, really delighted to join forces and have a really substantive discussion. How many people were at the town hall yesterday, the National Town Hall? All right, it's pretty intense, right? I was talking to folks about the fact that when you talk about voting and the issues you vote for, especially within the Black community, we're all sort of like-minded in this space, but the fact that we had some differing opinions, I think, is a good thing, right? About it's not just the act of voting, but what you're doing before, pre and post the vote to be civically engaged. And so with that, we're really excited to be here today. So I want to acknowledge Hillary Sheldon, who's here, from the director of NAACP. A fierce supporter and always with us at ALC. So we also have the honor of being sponsored by Airbnb, and Laura Murphy will bring remarks, national expert on voting rights. I will introduce her shortly. I do want to lift up the National Election and Defense Coalition. They have handouts. Ben Potashnik, who's the CEO, Barbara Arnwine, who heads up the Transformative Justice Coalition, Joel Siegel, who is no stranger to those of us in this room fighting ardently for the right to vote, the free and fair right to vote. And so we are working with them in conjunction and cooperation with the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus. Some of you may have heard was recently established, Congressman VC being one of the leaders and co-chairs who has just done a phenomenal job of organizing the leadership and members of the CBC in this space. So let's give them all a round of applause. Okay. So now, without further ado, I'd like to acknowledge Congressman Mark Vesey, as I just mentioned, who serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, with over 15 major military installments in Texas, where the state he represents, in defense and scientific research and development are key industries in his 33rd district. In the 114th Congress, Congressman Vesey proudly accepted his appointment by the U.S. Democratic Minority Whip Steny Hoyer to serve as an assistant whip and regional whip. Congressman Vesey is an advocate for the Texas middle-class families and has made it his top priority to work and help create and incentivize the creation of good, sustainable American jobs while providing Texans with a stronger voice on job creation and economic policy. He has been instrumental in the establishment of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus, where he serves as chair, as I just mentioned, along with Congressman John Lewis, Congressman Bobby Scott, and Congressman Terry Sewell. Look out for this caucus. They've got a website up, but follow them and follow all of these folks on stage with us that are doing some really important work. All right, without further ado, let's give Congressman Vesey, the Honorable Congressman Vesey, a round of applause.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you this morning to come and talk about a very important and timely topic, which is voting rights. I think with this presidential election that is looming and is going to be decided here in November, voting rights should really be on all of our minds. I think that whomever the next president of the United States is, that next Supreme Court justice that is picked will ultimately decide a lot of these cases that we're talking about right now that's going on around the country as it relates to voter ID laws, like what I was a plaintiff on, and I'll talk about a little bit later, voter registration drives and proof of citizenship before you're allowed to register to vote. We know that that's a case that's being looked at. The shutting down of early vote locations and the combining of polling locations. So many things there too that will affect one's right to vote. And so this presidential election is going to really, really decide a lot of that. The district that I represent is in Fort Worth and Dallas. And my state senator just stepped out. Hopefully he'll be back in here in a minute ago. I wanted to acknowledge him because before I was the plaintiff in the VC versus Abbott lawsuit that was able to turn back the voter ID law, the very restrictive voter ID law. That was put in place in the state of Texas. And of course, this is my second term in Congress, but you know, these legal battles can take some time. I actually became a plaintiff to this lawsuit, the lead plaintiff to this lawsuit, while I was still a member of the state legislature back in 2011. And one of the people that helped fight on that was Senator Royce West, who was just in the back of the room also from Dallas, and many other friends in the legislature. And let me briefly just give you some history on how I got involved in that case and what happened. So in 2013, after the Supreme Court handed down their decision to scale back the Voting Rights Act with Shelby versus Holder, the Texas Attorney General immediately said, "We're going to go back to the old law." So we're going to go back to we're going to put the Texas voter ID laws into place because it was successfully being challenged. Texas again had one of the toughest forms of voter ID in the state. And there's the senator that I was just mentioning a second ago, Senator Royce West out of Dallas, still fighting many of these suggestions and laws in the state of Texas. And immediately following the ruling, Texas began enforcing this law. Let me tell you how restrictive our laws are in Texas. If you had a ID that was issued to you by the state of Texas at one of our universities, Prairie View A&M, Texas Southern, University of Texas, Texas A&M, you could not use that college ID with your name on it. That can be used to identify you with campus law enforcement and other law enforcement in these college cities. It could not be used to vote, but you could use your concealed handgun license to vote. And so that is how restrictive that our laws were. In Texas, you know, many of you know we're a very large state. We have 254 counties in the state of Texas. El Paso is in a different time zone from the rest of us. We're in Central Time Zone. El Paso is in the Mountain Time Zone. We are a really, really large state, and some of our counties out of the 254 actually didn't even have places where you could go and get your voter ID card or a driver's license or any of the other IDs that were required. Many people had trouble finding documentation like birth certificates and what have you, family Bibles that recorded their births. And the Republicans knew that when they passed it. So in July 2016, after a very long battle, the full court of the Fifth Circuit ruled in favor of Texas voters. And let me tell you how significant that is. People that have followed these court decisions, whether it's dealing with reproductive rights or voting rights, that is probably the most conservative appeals court in the entire country. And the fact that they ruled the way they did so strongly that this bill went too far is really, really good news. The courts have found what we always knew to be true, and that the Texas restrictive voter ID law intentionally discriminated against minority voters and disenfranchises eligible American voters. In their decision, the court asked the judge presiding over the case to issue updated procedures that allow people without an ID to cast their ballot. This November, Texans will be able to cast a regular ballot without jumping through so many hoops. And what they're going back to is what Royce and myself and other Democrats in the state legislature were suggesting all along as the Republicans are trying to push this very restrictive law through. While some voters will still need to provide some form of ID at the polls under the updated law, the new procedures provides flexibility for those who can't access a photo ID. Those voters can now show an alternative form of identification, such as bank statements and utility bills, and sign a simple declaration form. This recent decision is the first step in ensuring that voters are able to participate in the democratic process. But we do have to remember, while we're seeing victories in different voter ID cases in my home state of Texas and across the country, the fight to restore access to the ballot box is not over in Congress. We must work together to update the original Voting Rights Act, a task that was left up to Congress after the Supreme Court decision 3 years ago. I'm actually working on a bill right now declaring September as National Voting Rights Month so we can bring awareness. Thank you. So we can bring awareness for the need to continue to protect the right to vote. And I think that is a huge challenge for a lot of different reasons. A lot of people simply don't think that this is not a problem. People want to talk about, other issues and other things. People see this as a problem, of the 1960s. I don't see it as a problem of the day. And so getting people energized and focused on this issue and realizing that it really, really is a problem is going to take all of us working together to ensure that democracy is for all of us in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. So a couple little house notes here. First of all, I want to acknowledge Wade Henderson, the head of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, who's part of this panel. my first boss after I graduated from college. Helped launch my career this way. So we are also so honored to have the Dean of the United States House of Representatives, Congressman Conyers. I have so much to say about him, but just because you are who you are, let's give him a round of applause. Still going to tell you all about him, even though you know already. Congressman Conyers was elected to his 26th consecutive term, making him the first African American to hold the distinction as dean, the most senior member of Congress. A true pioneer elected in 1965, Congressman Conyers' leadership and record is unmatchable, remarkable, undeniable, necessary, and because of him, the lives of African Americans and all Americans are better. As current ranking member of the Judiciary Committee and the first African American to serve as the chair of the House Committee on the Judiciary in 2007, Congressman Conyers' 50-plus years of public service is extraordinary. He has always been a fighter for jobs and the economy, for the full rights and benefits of African Americans, and a staunch believer, advocate, and leader for the free and fair right to vote. With over 100 pieces of legislation fighting for justice and equality, from the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to the Motor Voter Bill of 1993, protecting the rights of voters, and a leading advocate behind the Help America Vote Act in 2002, and so much more, Congressman Conyers has left an indelible mark in our nation's history and present day. And thanks to him, on the third Monday of every January in the United States, we celebrate Martin Luther King Day. Because of the Honorable Congressman John Conyers. And thanks to him, our entire nation takes pause to remember, celebrate, acknowledge, and recognize the sacrifices, struggle, and fight for justice that Martin Luther King and so many others across the nation fought for and continue to fight for. Congressman Conyers, we thank you. I have to lift up Michigan. Dr. LaShonda Brenton and I went to University of Michigan and studied you for, you are the reason we're doing the work that we're doing to, we can't follow in your footsteps, but we're gonna try because we have to keep the legacy going for our people. So Congressman Conyers, we thank you for the Martin Luther King Act of 1983, for your powerful leadership that has been heard around the world. And we thank our Almighty God for you. So without further ado, let's give the Honorable Congressman Conyers, Dean of the Congress, a round of applause.
Top of the morning, everyone. I am so pleased and honored to be with you on this very important subject. The panel, which includes my good brother, Lacey Clay, who I came to Congress and soon afterward his father came in, and we had been working together. And so the Conyers-Clay connection still continues. My brother, good to see you. I want to commend our moderator, the head of this outfit, Nicole Austin Hillary. Thank you for your work, my dear. It's curious, isn't it, that the most precious right that we have is often taken for granted or denigrated by the people who have been kept out of the democratic process of selection and who governs in a democracy. They're the most casual in many instances. Not always, but too often. Look, Conyers, I only have one vote, so I mean, we don't, yes, you only have one vote, but that one vote is what makes it a democracy. If we're playing by the rules, that's what people have died for and suffered in many other ways. And so, to me, this part of our legislative conference is extremely important. Now, let me get directly to this. To address calculated voter suppression, and it's amazing, isn't it, that trying to limit people's voting rights is still going on. I mean, there are two schools of thought. Let's make voting easier and more popular for everybody. And then there's another school, and they're not too bashful about it. Let's make voting as difficult as possible. I know we can't do the force and power strategies in the past that could intimidate, and we could challenge anybody we wanted to not vote. They could be brought under pressure. And these two schools of thought still exist. I mean, there are people that you don't have to go too far into their position to realize that they're trying to make voting as uncomfortable, as difficult as they possibly can. And thank goodness, in many places we have early voting, we have absentee voting. There's so many other ways that you can cast your ballot and let your voice be heard, and that's so important. And so what we're going to do and what we're trying to do, and I'm glad to see Joel Siegel on my staff, who worked with me for many years, and he's still out in the field working still. Joe, thank you for all you've done. It's great to have a job where we can enjoy what we're doing, and that the victories really mean something. And it's incredible for me to stand here and say, I still like my job. And I keep thinking, what do these people do that leave the Congress, this powerful place where you can determine the direction of the laws, the policy, and how things are done, and what things mean, and help steer the court, and the court steers you back. But it's a wonderful way for us to do this, to do what we're doing here today, is examining how we get more people to vote. What is it that I can say or do that will make people who are saying, well, I'll probably vote if the weather's okay, if this, that, or the other works out, if I'm not too busy doing something else. What is it that we need to do? And I'm hopeful that with all the people here, we can begin to examine new strategies. You can never stop. And by the way, this election is very, very important. I mean, I just close by saying, of course we want turnout, and we want everybody to vote, but we've got there's a big decision underlying the choices that will be made on November the 8th. Very, very big directions we'll be going in. And the one thing about the candidates is they really have seriously different views about many things. I won't say everything, but many things. Their positions have completely different consequences if we take them at their word. And I'm going to be right around here these last, I think it's 50-something days now, to be careful and alert to suppression tactics on voting. And I've got a great ally in my Republican colleague from Wisconsin, Jim Sensenbrenner. He and I introduced H.R. 885, the Voting Rights Amendment Act, which is designated to restore the vitality and effectiveness of voting rights in this country. We've also introduced H.R. 1459, the Democracy Restoration Act, declaring the right of all citizens to vote in any election for federal office and shall not be denied it because that individual has been convicted of a criminal offense. Currently, this gets us. Currently, nearly 4 million of the disqualified voters are not in prison but on probation or parole. Nearly 3 million of the disenfranchised have completed their entire sentence, including probation and parole. And I believe that such prohibitions on voting undermine the fundamental rights of people with felony convictions that have straightened out or they made a big mistake. Just as Congress has ignored political headwinds and set partisan differences aside 5 decades ago to prohibit discriminatory voting practices, this Congress and the next must again muster the political courage to enact legislation to protect the voting rights of all Americans. And so to all of you here and my distinguished group of panelists, and to Miss Austin Hillary, they are all uniquely qualified to give us some ideas about what each one of us can do. Everybody's got some power. Everybody can influence a number of people. We all we all don't have to get elected or have titles or be lawyers. Look, this is something that we, the people, can determine and should determine. And I'm so proud of a couple of the attorney generals that have come our way in the last 2 decades. Lynch is on the ball. And Eric Holder did a great job as well. And so we've got the wind at our back, and I'm so proud to be able to be with you on this Judiciary Brain Trust. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Congressman Conyers. I know you all are anxious to hear the discussion, but I do want to acknowledge Congressman Clay, who will be here for the panel, but allow him to make some remarks, and also Ms. Laura Murphy, who will make brief remarks. So if I can turn it over to Congressman Clay, who has done a phenomenal job in his own right, but also in terms of being the co-chair of the annual legislative conference. I've got to know you more personally over the past few months, and I can say he is truly committed in every way to all the pertinent issues facing our community. So without further ado, please give your round of applause for the Honorable Congressman Clay.
Thank you so much. And, it's a pleasure to be here with my 2 colleagues, Mark Vesey, as well as our national treasure, John Conyers. He is certainly someone that I rely on in the Congress. Let's give him another round of applause. He's also a great jazz fan, but he stepped up and gave us quite an assist when Ferguson erupted. He and Joel, and I want to personally thank you for that assist. I can honestly say that this morning's topic, protecting the right to vote, is the most urgent, most endangered, and most critical issue that we are facing. Because all across this country, that most fundamental constitutional right is under assault. That's true in my home state of Missouri, where the forces of voter suppression are trying to pass a constitutional amendment to impose a photo ID requirement. And that could possibly disenfranchise over 225,000 voters whom are black, disabled, or rural poor. And just like in Indiana, North Carolina, Texas, Wisconsin, and far too many other jurisdictions, that is no accident. Yeah, since the disastrous and in my view, wrongly decided Supreme Court decision in Shelby County versus Holder, which severely weakened the Voting Rights Act, jurisdictions at all levels of government who fear the diversity of the new American electorate have been in a misguided race to see how many roadblocks and modern-day poll taxes they can put in place to disenfranchise as many citizens of color as possible. All of that is happening while there is a real danger that our upcoming presidential election could be tampered with by a foreign power. And yet, Speaker Ryan doesn't see the urgency of something like the integrity of our election. But he does feel like, well, we can put as many obstacles in the way to let legitimate people cast their ballots. And meanwhile, legislation that we are co-sponsoring to reauthorize, revise, and fully restore the Voting Rights Act is being held hostage in the House Judiciary Committee by the majority. Not because it is objectionable, but because they know that if they let it come out to the floor for a vote, it would pass with a clear bipartisan majority. And so those are the tricks that are being played. So at the federal level, we have to ask the question why. And like most things in politics, it's all about power and math. And the math never lies. According to the highly respected Cook Report, in 2016, for the first time in our nation's history, the percentage of white voters will make up the total electorate on November 8th is projected to fall to 70%. African Americans are projected to make up 13% of all voters, Latinos 11%, and Asians 6%, and other ethnicities. So people of color are finally voting our weight. And instead of celebrating that injection of civic energy and full participation in our democracy, some people consider that a dire threat that must be suppressed at all costs. They just don't understand that history and demographics don't care about your politics or your prejudices or your obsolete ideas about who should sit at the table of power. And I have to add that history will not look kindly on those candidates who openly pander to and eagerly embrace the vile voices of hatred, division, bigotry, and intolerance to further their own political ambition. And, you know, in just a few weeks, as Congressman Conyers said, we are going to conduct the first presidential election in 50 years without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. And even though federal courts have struck down clearly discriminatory photo ID laws in Texas and North Carolina, winning those victories took many months and cost millions of dollars. Those fights and future court battles could be easily avoided if Congress would finally do its job to restore and fully reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. As someone who has fought voter suppression since my first election in 2000, defending thousands of my constituents on election day against an inactive voter list in St. Louis, the obvious and best solution would be to establish a uniform VRA pre-clearance mechanism across the country, nationally, so that we can ensure the same standard of voter protection for every citizen. Imagine that. Treat every voter the same. Protect the integrity of every ballot, and make participating in our democracy easier, not harder. And I look forward to participating in this distinguished group of panelists. So let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Clay. I want to acknowledge the DC Board of Elections who are here, and they have handouts as well as the foundation in terms of our voting rights toolkit. Again, I want to thank Airbnb for sponsoring this panel, and I would now like to introduce for brief remarks Laura Murphy, who's the president of Murphy Associates. As I mentioned, long-standing record with the American Civil Liberties Union, and has been an ardent supporter working on a lot of the same issues our members of Congress are working on. So without further ado, please welcome Ms. Laura Murphy.
So it's so wonderful to be here, and I've cut my remarks in half in the interest of getting to the panel. And this is like my 40th year coming to a CBC event. I started working for Perrin Mitchell in the 70s and Shirley Chisholm, and I'm just so excited to be with the CBC again. When I was a little girl in 1965, my mother put my picture in the paper, and she didn't ask my permission, and I was mad at her, but she said, she put it in the Baltimore Afro-American, our family's newspaper, and she said, the caption was, "I'm too young to vote, but please vote for my mother for city council in November." And she was so inspired by the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that she decided to run for city council. She lost overwhelmingly, but that started 14 runs for public office in my immediate family. So before I could even vote, I was asking other people to register to vote. And fast forward that to 1980, I became director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Public Education Project. And when my boss at the ACLU gave me that assignment, he said, "Laura, I'm giving you this assignment, but don't get your hopes up, because Ronald Reagan will never sign the Voting Rights Act extension into law." And a group of us, Elaine Jones, Lonnie Guinier, Ralph Nees, others, we said, hell to that. And we went to the White House and signed it into law. Fast forward to 2005, I was director of the ACLU Washington office, and my goal before I left to take care of family issues was to engage in shuttle diplomacy between Mr. Sensenbrenner and other Republicans and the Democrats on the committee, and to start kind of secret conversations about how the act could be extended. And you all saw the results of many of the activists up here, which was that the Voting Rights Act was extended again in 2006. So again, bring it to the present, I'm a consultant for Airbnb, and soon after I became a consultant, they said, you know, we noticed that a lot of the civil rights groups are talking about voting rights. Do you think we should do something about the Voting Rights Act? And I said, hell yeah. And so the Airbnb educated itself, and I helped educate them about how voting discrimination was flourishing nationwide. But too many corporations have largely been silent on the desperate need for Congress to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, and I'm proud to say Airbnb doesn't want to be in that category. Every day, discrimination limits the life and opportunities available to African Americans and Latinos, where we live, the quality of our education, or whether or not we can even vote. We know that members of the Airbnb community have faced discrimination when trying to book rooms through the platform, and the company is working with several of the organizations represented on this panel and the Congressional Black Caucus to help address this complex American issue at a systemic level within the company. And last week, the former Attorney General and I released my 32-page report documenting all of the ways Airbnb is going to prevent discrimination on its platform. And I ask you to read it, and I ask you to give that organization, that company, a chance to do the right thing, and also to keep its feet to the fire so that those recommendations are implemented and they don't become window dressing. I don't think that that's their intent at all. They formulated a fully funded team of scientists devoted to anti-discrimination full-time on its platform, the first time a technology company has done that. So I think that they're very committed. They put their money there. Engineers in Silicon Valley are some of the most expensive employees you can ever get. So that's a very serious commitment. Airbnb hasn't solved the problem, but it's being thoughtful and earnest in embracing the responsibility that comes with the privilege of being a successful business. That also means recognizing and taking action to address the injustices that Airbnb's guests and hosts of color must contend with in our communities. So on August 6th, Airbnb honored the Voting Rights Act through action. It provided funding for the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation and Voto Latino and Democracy Works to engage in nonpartisan voter registration efforts because of the importance of this upcoming election. Yes, I think they should be applauded for that. So I'm going to end by saying this. Being a positive force in the world means looking inward to see how our actions compound the injustices that are anathema to the public good. It also means looking outward and working to correct the systemic problems that hold our nation back. One important way to do that is to acknowledge that America is a place where everyone must have the right to vote, no matter what their race, and that's good for the country, and that's good for business, too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Murphy. I now have the distinguished pleasure of introducing to you our moderator for this morning. I would actually like to invite Mr. Wade Henderson now to join us on the panel. He is on this morning's panel. Nicole Austin Hillary is the director and counsel at the Washington, D.C. office for the Brennan Center, has done amazing work and has been in this space for us before, working on voting rights, racial and criminal justice advocacy and reform, and recently was published in the American Bar Association's 2016 volume and had a piece entitled Voter ID as a Form of Voter Suppression. She's an expert in this space, a friend of the CBCF, of Congressman Conyers, and all of us that are leading the fight to protect voting rights. And she's going to take us through this session of discussions on the federal protections of the Voting Rights Act. And then in the second series, she will also be moderating the state battle on voter protection. So please give a round of applause for our today's moderator, Nicole Austin Hillary.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And a special thank you to Congressman Conyers for giving me the honor and privilege of moderating today's discussion. In the past several years, Congressman Conyers has actually had me as a panelist on his voting panel. So I guess I got a promotion this year. So I am so pleased to be moderating this discussion. Look, we have heard from Congressman Conyers, Congressman Vesey, and Congressman Clay, and from Laura Murphy. So we have been charged. We know what the job is here today, so I'm going to get right to it. I will say this, though. I love that Congressman Vesey discussed the fact that in light of these various voter suppression issues that we all know about and that we've seen in the news, that what we've seen recently in the courts is that the truth has come out. I have to tell you, just a few years ago when I started talking about these issues, and again, you heard my role is as director of the Washington office of the Brennan Center for Justice, and you've probably seen us in the news. The Brennan Center is committed to doing what we call fixing those broken parts of our systems of democracy and justice. And a big part of the work that we do is fighting the voting rights battles. And I will tell you, just a few years ago, we had consultants that would talk to us about this issue of voter suppression. And like many of my panelists here, when we would talk to the media, they would say, well, Nicole, when you get on TV and talk about this issue, don't say that this is about race. And don't say that this is about, some people wanting to keep some people away from the voting booth, even though those of us doing that work, we knew it was the truth. But we were concerned about getting the rest of America on our side on this issue. And there were some folks who thought talking about race and calling it what it is was not going to resonate. Well, the courts have now stepped out, and they've called it what it is. And we are very pleased about that. So we are going to have a truth-telling discussion today. Okay, we're going to have a truth-telling discussion. And we're going to start, you all, talking about what some of the problems are, but we are going to end with talking about the good news. I always like to tell people, I do not get up here and lead discussions on just bad news. We are going to have a bad news, good news discussion, because we have fought serious fights over the last few years, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There are reform measures in place, and we are moving forward in this effort to not only restore the right to vote in areas in which it has been diminished, but also to ensure that we are making it easier, more transparent, and more accessible for as many Americans as possible to engage in and participate in our democracy. So that's what we're going to leave here with today. I want to just very quickly acknowledge all of the panelists, and then we're going to get into the discussion. And I will tell you, I'm going to pose a series of questions to our panelists because they all have so much expertise to add, because I want us to have a real conversation. So we're going to start the conversation, and then before we leave, we're going to engage you all in that conversation. I appreciate that you all are giving us your rapt attention, but you are here to be part of the solutions that we want to get to by the end of this conversation. So we will make sure to get you into this discussion. So without further ado, we all know who the congressman is, and we again appreciate his tenure and his work and his leadership. Next to the congressman is Wade Henderson. Wade Henderson is president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And as Mina discussed, she said Wade was her first boss. Now, Wade was not my first boss, and I will get to that in a second. But Wade is someone who has mentored me and just helped me to grow as a civil rights advocate and practitioner since I was in my 20s. So that was only just yesterday. But I am always pleased and honored to be on a panel with Mr. Henderson. So thank you, Wade, for joining us. Next to Mr. Henderson is indeed my first boss out of law school. I know you all think we planned it this way, but we really didn't. Next to Mr. Henderson is the wonderful, dynamic Barbara Arnwine, who is president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition. And you all know that for many years, 26 years, I believe, Barbara was the leader and the head of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and we certainly appreciate and thank her for her leadership and her warriorship in leading the charge on voting rights and so many other issues that protect people of color in the United States. And we are so pleased that she is continuing that work with her new organization. So thank you, Barbara. Next to Barbara is Janae Nelson. Janae is the Associate Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Incorporated. Janae is a friend and colleague, and I also started my career before law school at the Legal Defense Fund. Again, this was not all planned, but we all work together in arms on so many of these issues, and we are so pleased to have Janae here. Janae is not only a consummate litigator, she is also an academic who is an expert on not only voting rights, but other issues in the civil rights community, and has been doing just a tremendous job helping to lead the work at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So Janae, we are pleased to have you here with us as well today. I'm pleased to introduce next to Janae, Reverend Rodney Sadler. One of the reasons I'm particularly pleased that the Reverend is here with us today is because, you know, sometimes my family jokes with me and they say, you Washingtonians, you people in Washington, you have these meetings, you're with Congress all the time. How are you keeping it real? Reverend Sadler's on the ground. It is so crucial and important to have voices that keep it real and that keep us honest and help us to always have our pulse on what is really going on. We write wonderful reports, we litigate cases, but at the heart of it, I tell people all the time, the reason I became a civil rights attorney is because at the heart of it is the people that we represent. So I am pleased to have Reverend Sadler with us today, who will talk to us about the crucial work that is going on in North Carolina and on the ground across the country. Thank you, Reverend Sadler. And again, you've heard from Representative Clay. I am pleased, Representative Clay, that you will be a part of this panel. And thank you so much. The work that we do at the Brennan Center is work that the Congressman has lifted up, and we are so pleased to always work with you and to help you to do the job that you do here on Capitol Hill. So thank you so much, Congressman. Next to the Congressman is the fearless leader of the NAACP, Cornell William Brooks. We are so proud and pleased to have you here with us, Cornell. You have been just leading the charge on the ground with folks across the country. You've been speaking truth to power on these issues. You have been putting it out there for the media and for everyone across the country to understand exactly what Black and brown folks and other disenfranchised folks have been dealing with. So we are so pleased and proud of your leadership and so happy to have you here on the panel with us today. So welcome. And last but certainly not least is my former colleague at the Brennan Center. I swear I didn't plan this, you all. Justin Levitt. Justin is the Deputy Assistant to the Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice. In that role, Justin works on a variety of voting rights issues, and previously he has served as an academic, and he was previously at the Brennan Center where he served as a voting rights expert there. So we are pleased to have Justin being here with us today representing the Department of Justice and helping us to better understand how the DOJ is working to ensure equitable and fair access to the voting booth this election season. So thank you, Justin. So we're going to get right to it. You've all heard already lots of comments about the Voting Rights Act. And I'm going to start with the Voting Rights Act because this panel this morning we're here to talk about what's going on the federal level. Because we know it is our Congress that we look to for leadership. And the way Congress goes is often the way the rest of the country goes, of course. So we want to start there with the Voting Rights Act, which we know has been the pinnacle of voter protection for us in the United States. So I'm going to start with you, Wade. As the leader of the nation's largest civil and human rights organization, and I think all of our organizations up here are members of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Wade and his organization have been helping to lead the fight in the effort to restore the Voting Rights Act. I know he's going to talk a little bit about that act and the case that led to it. I'm going to give you this little note, though, Wade, and he's probably said this to you. Former Attorney General Holder has asked that we no longer refer to it as Shelby versus Holder. He doesn't want his name associated with a case that has been so devastating for those of us who fight to protect voting rights. So I'm just going to say Shelby County when I talk about it up here. But Wade, please tell us about the landscape in Congress. What is being done right now to help protect voters and to help restore the Voting Rights Act as we know it?
Well, Nicole, thank you. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. Honored. I think Congressman Conyers most specifically talked about the legislative responses to this voting rights debacle. So he's talked about the various bills that are in place. But guys, I want to cut to a different chase, okay? I really do, because, and to answer your question, but to move slightly beside it, guys, we're facing a crisis. And, we do these panels, discussions, every year for the CBC. They're wonderful. They're gatherings where we come back together and, we renew our commitment to what's right, and the CBC helps us do that. But we often talk in a context in which we imply that we don't have power to control our own destiny, and that's not right. We have the power to control our destiny. The issue is, will we use it? So guys, I want to slightly veer, Nicole, because, look, this is really about power, right? This is about power, and it's about money. And, we have a saying in D.C., guys. It's real simple. If you're not in the room, then you can't possibly be at the table. Can't possibly be at the table. And if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. So, on the real side, this is about how we are going to control the spaces in which we live and the circumstances around our lives. Now, back up. 2008, Obama comes on the scene, does the unprecedented. And we are all aglow with pride about how we mobilized on his behalf and how he put together a coalition that delivered. So the lesson is real simple. In coalition, there is strength. If you're not practicing coalition politics, you're not practicing politics in the 21st century. So that's number one. And then, I know I'm taking too long. I'm going to shut up. But two things, guys, two things. These guys, what we are seeing today began in 2008 in response to Obama's election.
Right.
And so the truth is, the powers that be said, look, we are facing annihilation if we allow this effort to go unchallenged. Okay, unchallenged. So they devised a very sophisticated plan that began on the night of his inauguration. There was a big dinner in D.C. Mitch McConnell, powers on the Republican side, they met, they crafted a strategy to pursue a scorched earth policy with Obama. You get nothing. Right. You get nothing, and in return, you will be perceived as a failure, and then we will take over. Right. And to ensure that worked, they adopted a series of provisions at the state level to rig the outcome of the vote through the nonsense of voter ID and other issues, okay? Now, thank God for organizations like the Lawyers Committee, LDF, and others that litigated and gave us a shot. Without the litigators, we'd be dead. And it was the litigators that responded and kept us alive. But now we have to deliver politically, guys. And we're on the verge of blowing this. We're on the verge of blowing this. I've seen, oh God. If I hear one more time how people are bored with the election and, oh, I can't turn out and blah, 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 Isn't that really the narcotic that is intended to keep you from the polls? Okay? It's not about whether you're bored, and it's not whether you like the candidates. I mean, guess what? That's real. That's real. Make your decisions according to self-interest. So all I'm saying is this. The Republican leadership in the House of Representatives, it begins with Paul Ryan, has made a decision that you will not have a voting rights bill before the election. You're not going to have it. You're not going to have it because there is no benefit to them of bringing the bill up. You may want it, and that's great, but you're not going to be able to do anything about it unless you show up and show that you have some political power. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll, add to it later. Thank you.
If we start passing the plate, y'all, don't look like you don't know what's going on. I'm just giving you a warning. Okay, so Wade has let us know what is at stake. I want to turn to Congressman Clay because he, again, is our leader, one of our leaders here. Congressman Clay, tell us not only what you're dealing with, but tell the folks what do they need to be doing to take that power and use that power. As Wade just said, we have it. What do they need to do to use it to try to move Congress?
Well, let me share with you a conversation, and I'm sure John has had many of these with Chairman Goodlatte of the Judiciary Committee. Just like what Wade said, because we've been successful at the ballot box, because we elected President Obama twice, because we put together these coalitions, Goodlatte facetiously says, well, I don't see any need for the Voting Rights Act. It's succeeded. You all have a record number of African-American members in Congress, a record number of Latino members and Asians. So we don't really have a need for it. I mean, and that is his approach. It's disingenuous. It's not really accurate. But that is how they are denying a vote in the committee. And I think it is as I was sharing earlier, it's going to take us flipping the House in order to get that bill moving, unless it comes from the Senate. And maybe John can shed some more light on that, but that's the obstacle, to answer your question directly. That's the obstacle in the House of Representatives.
Okay. Thank you, Congressman. Cornell, I'm going to turn to you. So we've talked about what the state of things are on the Hill. Tell us what the state of things are out in the real world in the community. We know that folks have been dealing with voter ID issues. We know that they've been dealing with cutbacks to early voting. We know that folks have been dealing with language access issues, with closing of polling places. Tell us what folks are dealing with and what we need to be focused on in terms of helping to solve some of the issues that they're dealing with.
Certainly. So when we look, well, first of all, let me thank the moderator and certainly acknowledge the dean, Congressman assembled, and certainly the NAACP staff. To get right to the question, so what we see on the ground are the people who sacrifice literally blood, sweat, and tears to give us the Voting Rights Act, profoundly aware of the voter suppression with respect to race, in terms of photo IDs, the end of early voting, Sunday voting, you know the list. In at least 5 of the recent state, I should say 5 federal decisions in states largely in the South, the NAACP has been on the ground in the courts. But we also see among millennials a growing understanding that it's not just your grandparents' voter suppression, black and white, but this is Jim Crow 2.0, 2016, voter suppression in terms of young people. And so what we see among young people are college students signing a petition not to vote. We see a kind of generational clinical depression, agnosticism, a ambivalence about the power of the vote. That means that it is incumbent upon us to make the case for voting. So what we mean by that is we have to communicate that this voter suppression is in black and white, but it's also older versus younger. And so when we do that, that simply means that we make clear to people, particularly our millennial brothers and sisters, that when you suppress in an era of youth voter suppression, the youth vote, the millennial vote, is an act, a radical act of democracy. It's an act of civic subversion. And so what that means is, on the ground, we have to make clear that we're standing together on this. So that meant going to Congressman Goodlatte's district, sitting in his office, getting arrested, not with senior citizens, we had them there too, but with high schoolers, to send a message through social media. Having 1,300 people arrested at the Capitol for the restoration of the Voting Rights Act, the largest number in the 90s. It meant walking from Selma to DC, engaging 5 million people online. The point being is we have to make the connection between civic engagement and voter mobilization, between voter protection and voter protest. And so that means going into the fall, our Stay Woke and Vote campaign, going through the HBCUs, going across the college campusing, registering young people to vote and motivating them to vote, not based on the candidates, but based on the issues. And so that means talking about criminal justice, talking about policing, talking about police misconduct, and the necessity of not only deciding who the next president will be, but deciding who your local prosecutor will be. We've got to take this campaign to the people. Second, it means mobilizing the African American church, the black church. So having an NAACP Sunday on the 25th of October, 25th of October, preceding the National Voter Registration Day on the 27th. Thirdly, it means focusing on those states where we've seen in 2008 and 2012 elevated black turnout, those also being the same states where we see voter suppression, largely in the South and the Midwest. And so the point being is, just as Wade has lifted out, carrying out a disciplined plan of turning out the vote. Last point here, and again, I'm going to echo Wade on this, coalitions. We cannot do this by ourselves. Amen. And so that means coalitions in terms of voter mobilization, but also coalitions in terms of lifting up the need to restore the Voting Rights Act. In other words, if we appeal to young people simply saying, it is your civic duty to vote, you should vote, your grandparents voted, that is necessary but insufficient. What we have to do is make it clear that they are at the heart of this election. And that means we have to radicalize this election, i.e., when you disrespect President Obama, you're disrespecting our people, right? In the same way that we are no longer considered 3/5 of a human being, our president in 3/5 of a president. That means we need him respected, no birtherism. We also need a seat on the Supreme Court, and that means we need to preserve his legacy. Not partisan, but that civil rights legacy needs to go forward. And again, a disciplined plan of turning out the vote. Last point here. Financially, we got to talk to the people who are supporting civic engagement, because this is an underfunded effort. When our organizations moved 1 million people in 2012, 15% of new voters on duct tape and shoestring. And now we got less duct tape and less shoestring. So when you wake up the morning after the election and the result is not what you want, don't blame anybody in this room. Fund it now. Pay for it now.
Thank you, Cornell. Reverend Sadler, I'm going to stick with this theme. I'm going to go to you because you have some very particular examples. We all know North Carolina has been in the news so much. I tell you, Reverend Sadler, I used to, when I would talk about these issues, always tell people, if you're from Texas, hold your head down. But now I don't know. I might have to start teasing people about North Carolina, except things are getting better. So I want you to talk to us about how you all, particularly as a faith-based community, have been working with folks on the ground to make them aware of the issues, to educate them, because that's the other thing I always tell people about. It's not just enough to sound the alarm bell and tell people what's wrong. You also have to, and that goes back to Wade's point about power, you educate the public so that people can then be armed to deal with some of these issues. So talk to us about how you all have been successful with that in North Carolina. And then I'm going to turn to Barbara, because I want to tie into what Cornell talked about, Barbara, which is how this is not just about voting rights. So many of these issues are inextricably linked. The criminal justice and these other issues, and the work that you're doing at Transformative Justice Coalition ties into that. So Reverend Sadler, why don't you start us off, and then we'll go to Barbara.
Thank you for that question. The great state of North Carolina, as you know, has been a state that's been beset by voter disenfranchisement in the last few years in particular. You all know of HB 589, which was the monster voter disenfranchisement bill that went into place shortly after the Shelby County, is that the way we say it now?
Yes.
The Shelby County decision. In which the legislators of the state of North Carolina, in essence, said, we no longer have any reason why we can't put forward an omnibus bill to address voter disenfranchisement in the city. They didn't say voter disenfranchisement, in the state of North Carolina. They put in place this bill that had at least 5 major foci, one of which was to ask for voter ID. The only form of voter ID that would be acceptable is DMV authorized voter ID, but only once they gathered data to realize that African Americans were least likely to have access to this form of identification. They eliminated same-day registration, which would have been a provision that was provided by the North Carolina voting election boards during the early voting period, but realized that this was only going to go into place once they realized that African Americans were most likely to make use of this as a means of getting registered. They got rid of early voting, or cut back the window of early voting from 17 to 10 days, because they realized that the first 7 days were the 7 days that African Americans tended to vote the most. Got rid of pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds with driver's licenses. In essence, they surgically looked at all of those things that we could do to impact the African American vote and tried to find a way to get beyond that. In the aftermath of that, Dr. Barber, who will speak on the next panel, the North Carolina NAACP put forward a petition against Governor Pat McCrory that was, in essence, asking to overturn this based upon the fact that this was racially discriminatory. You all know about this. It went forward. Eventually, it was ruled against us, but the Fourth Circuit Court decided that not only was there discrimination in this law, but discriminatory intent in the nature of the way that it was built. In essence, they determined that this was not only an ideology, a racist ideology behind this law, or this law, but that there was a racist intent in the way it was realized. In essence, and I want to say this right now, let me talk about race in a second, if that's all right, too. This gives us an open door to say that many of these tactics that are used not only in North Carolina, not only in Texas, but across the country are fundamentally racist. If they didn't like it when we said it, but now the Fourth Circuit Court has said it. Therefore, we need to make as much think about this as possible to make sure that people realize that this is what's at stake when we wrestle with some of these voter disenfranchisement activities. So in the state of North Carolina, we were happy, we're celebrating. And then 17 days later, after the Fourth Circuit's ruling, the state of North Carolina decided to appeal to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court rejected it. Hey, we've won again. So we're thinking we're going to have a great election now. We have all of our rights restored. We have an opportunity to continue on that trajectory that was getting African American vote to a parallel level with the white vote in the state of North Carolina. Then Dallas Woodhouse, the executive director of the Republican Party in the state of North Carolina, sent out a letter that said, in essence, we want all of you all on the state local election boards to push for a reduction in the days of early voting and to try to put forward the larger Republican agenda as you rule locally on what your local boards will do in terms of voting. In essence, we went from a statewide concern to individual municipalities or individual local voting districts putting in place smaller versions of HB 589 in order to disenfranchise voters. So we've been pushing back against this. The North Carolina ICP has done a great job. The Moral Monday Forward Together movement has been working to press against these issues for years, trying to raise popular support. Issues that weren't on anybody's radar are now on everybody's radar after 3 years of waging this campaign. But one of the things that we've done recently, we decided that we needed a weekend to begin to focus on voting rights as a spiritual concern. We put together a lectionary that basically said, these are the issues that are at stake for the people in North Carolina. These are some texts that you can preach on. These are some ways that you can use a previous version of this by Barbara Williams Skinner to talk about the way that voting is a spiritual concern, a larger issue. If you take away a person's right to vote, you're fundamentally taking away their humanity. You're taking away their agency. You're taking away their ability to represent what it is that God has put in them. I like to say it this way. You are undermining the image of God in humanity and keeping people created in God's image from exercising their full constitutional rights. It is a dehumanizing activity. So we tried to make this point and get the people who are preaching and teaching regularly in Christian, Muslim, Jewish congregations to begin to make this point to their congregations. One of the things I think we also tried to do was try to expand this larger issue. We often think about voter disenfranchisement as an issue that impacts the African American community. Amen? But one of the things we have to realize is that if black people don't vote, that also means progressive issues don't get the stance that they might otherwise get. So we may not get affordable health care and move towards a single-payer system. We may not get environmental justice and move towards eradicating the problematic nature of climate change. We may not get housing or housing for the poor or a living wage for white people if black people are disenfranchised. One of the things that we've realized in the state of North Carolina is everybody's issues are at stake when we talk about voter disenfranchisement. We also have to talk about the nature of the way that race has been used. And I want to come back to this later on if I get a chance to later on and mention this. We have got to, at some point in time, have that long overdue conversation about race. We can talk about voter disenfranchisement and put wonderful bills in place to begin to address this concern. But unless we begin to get rid of the corrosive ideology that says some people are just not as worthy as others, some people's voices don't need to be listened to because of the color of their skin, because of the nature of their character, unless we can begin to get rid of the corrosive idea that is race that undermines the American dream for all people, we will continue to have these conversations over and over again. I think it's time that we finally begin to see what is the role that having a notion of hierarchical relationships of human beings, what is the role that that plays in the undermining of all of our rights as American citizens?
Thank you. And that is a great way to tee up Barbara. I planned it this way, y'all. Barbara, you are doing some amazing work with the Transformative Justice Coalition. So I want you to talk about, because again, I think it is important for folks to understand how these issues all tie together. I tell folks all the time, when you think about civil rights, you cannot just look very narrowly at just voting rights and think it's just about voting rights. You have to look at criminal justice. You have to look at educational equity, environmental equity. all of these things work together for good, as we all know. And again, we're not having church in here, but allow me to borrow just a little bit of what I learned in Sunday school. Barbara, please talk to us about the work you're doing with the coalition. And also, folks should know, over the last 2 days, Barbara led the resurgence of a very important gathering, a conference of African American women. It was called African American Women in the Law, and we thank you, Barbara, for bringing that back. So please talk to us about these different issues that you're working on, Barbara, and how folks need to be thinking about them in tandem with the fight for voting rights.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My voice is a little weakened from the conference. We had a wonderful conference. It just concluded 2 days ago, and then I had to teach. But I wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, let's focus on the 13 million voters whose votes are at risk. 13 million, 5 million based on outright voter suppression. Number would have been higher, but we have protected through the litigation about 1 million votes. Still remaining 5 million at risk. 5 million additional voters who are facing the inability to vote because of these felon disenfranchisement laws. 3 million people with disabilities whose votes are at risk. We know it based on data studies. Dara Baldwin is here from NDRN, one of the big advocates groups for disability rights. We got to look at all of these categories. 13 million. Think about what this means for our nation. What I also want to say is that I believe, as you know, in empowering voters all the time. So if you go to our website, tjcoalition.org, you're going to find a report that I did. It was meant to be a report. It looks like a book. Oh, well. You know, but it's on fostering an inclusive democracy. And it talks about the strategies that we must adopt as a community to win. And they are winnable strategies. So I encourage you to see that. Also, every 2 weeks, we put out a newsletter that is solely devoted to what people need to know about what's going on in voting rights in our nation. It's called the VRA Advocate. You can sign up and subscribe to get a copy of it. It has a lot of great information. In addition to the 13 million, I should have also mentioned that the bad machines. The machine problem is huge this year because a lot of the HAVA machines are outdated. We don't have the proper security over our machines. Join us next week on September the 21st at 10 o'clock at House Triangle, where we will have the introduction of the Hank Johnson bill to deal with the machines. And that's going to be very important. The National Election Defense Coalition has been leading that effort. And you see on right here, right in a row, Mike Hirsch, Joel Siegel, and Ben Potasnik is somewhere in the room. All right there behind them. There you go, Ben. Jim Duffin. All right. And great. So I just want us to be very clear that this is our fight. Now, every time somebody tells me about how it doesn't matter if I vote, I said, do you know that they spent in 2012 $5 billion trying to suppress the vote? Do you know that there are PACs, super PACs, that have emerged in the last 2 years that have nothing but voter suppression as their mission? They're active in North Carolina. They're active in Illinois. They are attacking all of our voting rights. And I say, if your vote had no meaning, then why are people spending so much money to get it taken away? I think that we have to be very clear. The other thing I point out to people, when some of the younger people tell me I'm too radical I'm too cool to vote. I tell them, you better go back and read some COINTELPRO. You better educate yourself about COINTELPRO, because if you think Holder and Lynch were hard on you, you've never seen anything. You are crazy to think that under a different administration that there would not be harsher punitive and repressive measures against your marches and against everything that you stand for. I said, be real, get real, and grow up on this one. But also though, I also say, look at what the other young people are doing. Because BYP 100 has rocked it in Chicago. This is young people, Black Youth 100, Project 100. They threw out of office through their organizing. They remember that it's not just about the vote, it's about the accountability of the vote. And they threw out of office Anita Alvarez because she did not hold the police accountable in Chicago. Voters in Cleveland threw out of office Tim McGinty because he would not prosecute the people for Tamir Rice's death. People in Florida threw out of office Corey because of her failure to deal with the Melissa Alexander problem correctly, because it wasn't a problem, she made it a problem. Our people, if we vote, this intersection between our fight in the streets against police violence is directly tied to our vote. The intersection against mass incarceration. We have all these states to spend 3 times the money to incarcerate a person than they do to educate a person. This is our fight. This is what our vote means. We have to teach this to our people. We have to teach this because it's not just the young saying it. I know some 60-year-olds talking this nonsense. So we need to really be clear that our fight is about ourselves. And I want to also say, be sure to join the Voting Rights Alliance. Yes, at VRA Matters, we are a new coalition alliance of organizations fighting. We've been blessed to have been able to work with the new, beautiful, wonderful, gorgeous Congressional Voting Rights Caucus to do the work that has to be done. So for all of us, for our new leaders like Rhea Thompson Washington sitting in the audience, for the people who are doing the work as millennials and young people, for Charlene Carruthers, for all of my sisters and brothers who are out there fighting, let's remember that this struggle means that this election day, not one of us can be sitting at home. Not one of us can be just, quote, doing the usual, going to work. Take that day off. Be a voting rights advocate. Make sure that everybody you know is one. Let's make sure that we don't allow Trump to get away with this nonsense about having intimidators at the polls. Where are people going to be? Are you going to be one of those people standing up? Stand up if you're going to be standing up. I want to see you right now. Stand up, because we have to win this fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yes, and I should have mentioned that next week we're having a millennial convening. We're bringing together some of the best millennial organizers in the country to Morgan State University, and we're doing an intensive let's get ready training for the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So, Barbara, that is a perfect segue to what I would like Janae and Justin to get into. And Justin, I've saved you for last for a reason, not just because we're former colleagues and friends, but you all have now heard what is going on the ground. You've heard what the fight has been about. You've heard what we've been dealing with in Congress. Janae and the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund have been warriors in the courtroom. So I told you we were going to have a problem and then a solution conversation. Janae, talk to us about the litigation and some of the successful things that have been happening with respect to litigation, but also talk to us about some of the other issues that LDF has been teeing up that we know are so important as we talk about moving forward. Janae, you all just this morning had an editorial in the LA Times talking about some of the issues around the right to vote for those who are formerly incarcerated. So again, we have to be forward thinking, and we have to be looking at what are the other areas when we talk about voting rights and human rights that we have to be focused on and that we have to be working towards with respect to a reform agenda. So Janae, talk to us about that, and then Justin, I'm going to turn to you to talk to us about DOJ and its leadership and what it's doing to help ensure that Americans are empowered when it comes to the voting booth. Janae.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that we are gathered here to discuss this incredibly important issue. And I have to say, I'm personally humbled to be on a panel with Mr. Vesey, Congressman Vesey, who led the charge in the voter ID case in Texas. And we had the privilege of arguing that case in the Fifth Circuit. But it was really your leadership as a state senator in lifting up that issue and opposing SB 14 that got us before the Fifth Circuit and got us the victory that is getting so much attention. So I want to thank you for your leadership. And it takes that sort of leadership among our elected officials and our Dean Conyers and his fight that has lasted for so long now on the Democracy Restoration Act to deal with the very issue that Nicole mentioned that I wrote about in the LA Times. The issue of felon disenfranchisement is one that we cannot forget and leave off the table. And I want to tie all of this together under this theme of leadership at every level. So we've talked about the leadership that we need on the ground from young people, from our elected officials, and the leadership that we need in the courts. And that's what I really want to underscore. Not only has our Congress been recalcitrant in pushing forward one of the bills to restore the Voting Rights Act to its full capacity. We have the Voting Rights Amendment Act, the Voting Rights Advancement Act. We have Goodlatte saying that he will not give a hearing to anything to preserve this legislation that has advanced our democracy for over 50 years. But we also have a Congress that refuses to give a hearing on a Supreme Court justice nominee, which is the most direct affront to the Obama administration, to his presidency, to his leadership that we can imagine. And he has been facing this his entire tenure as a presidency. And in these last and final months, when he's faced with one of the most important charges of a president, and that is to nominate and recommend to fill a vacancy on the Supreme Court, he is being completely denied that execution of his authority. And that is really what is at stake in this election. So many incredible civil rights gains, so many important advances, but one of them is often overlooked. It seems a little too technical, but it really is the composition of this court. That is one of the most fundamental issues at stake in this election. When we talk about the fact that we've been able to preserve some of our voting rights through litigation, it is because of the composition of the courts. And in the Texas case that we did win before the Fifth Circuit, we have not gotten out from under that yoke yet, because Texas is still threatening to take it up to the Supreme Court. We are still litigating with Texas over the very interim order that is to govern this upcoming election, down to the words that are in the poll worker manuals. We have to fight tooth and nail for every single gain. That depletes our resources, that diverts our attention from so many other important measures that we could be focused on to just preserve what we had prior to 2013. So we would not be in this fight if we had, one, the Voting Rights Act at its full capacity, and also if we could rely on courts to say once and for all that these sorts of voter suppression tactics are absolutely unconstitutional. They violate our democratic ideals, and we will not entertain further litigation on this. States, if you engage in this sort of direct affront to democracy, you are violating the Constitution, and we need a court that we know we can rely on for that type of outcome. We will not get that court if we do not turn out and insist upon that from any candidate who ultimately wins the presidency. So that is what is at stake in this election. And there has been a lot of positive development. You mentioned the issue of felon disenfranchisement and the fight that's gone on in that area for decades. I started off at the Legal Defense Fund dealing with the issue of felon disenfranchisement, challenging New York's felon disenfranchisement laws, and that was back in the early 2000s, and we did not win that fight. I am so pleased, though, to see the tide turning ever so slightly on this issue. As we recognize the overly carceral state that is the United States of America, we realize the impact that it is having on the integrity of our democracy. If you think about it, there are 5.8 million Americans, regardless of race, 5.8 million Americans who cannot vote because they have been convicted of a felony. 1 in 13 African Americans cannot vote because of these laws. And these laws were enacted originally with the intent to deprive newly freed enslaved persons from voting. And that legacy continues today when you look at how it's impacting our electorate. If you compare that 1 in 13 voters, African American voters that can't vote, it's only 1 in 56 Americans generally. So if you look at the statistics, they are vastly skewed. And that is not for an innocuous reason. That is a direct continuation of the intentional discrimination that those laws were designed to enact. So what we are hoping to advance is progressive legislation like Dean Conyers has advanced for so many years, and also to continue to fight these issues in the courts, to support progressive state efforts around felon disenfranchisement. For example, in California, Governor Jerry Brown has an opportunity next week to vote on a bill that will enable 50,000 people who are not in prison, who have escaped that prison route and have been sentenced to more lenient supervision, who are not considered on parole. We need to make sure that we have legislation that clarifies that those 50,000 individuals have an unfettered right to vote. When we look at what Governor McAuliffe is doing in Virginia, the amazing leadership that he has shown in looking at 13,000 individual applications after he was denied the clemency that he tried to offer to all persons who had exited the prison system. He was challenged on that, and just yesterday the state Supreme Court said, you know what? You are doing the right thing. You've looked at these individual applications of 13,000 individuals that you have granted clemency to have the valid right to vote. And we need to applaud the leadership of elected officials like that. We need to applaud that leadership. And we need to continue to fight for the Voting Rights Act. I cannot underscore that enough. It is something that we talk about. It is something that is hanging out there, but where is our outrage? Where is our activism? Where is every effort that needs to be made to make sure that this happens? We cannot be distracted by the hype around the election and not think about the long-term consequences of not having this incredibly important democracy checkpoint in place. And we will pass this election without it, but this should be the very last that we face without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act.
Thank you, Janae. Before I go to you, Justin, I just want to tee up for the folks here. After Justin, Congressman Veazey, I'm going to give you an opportunity to address a question that I have for you. But one of the things, Janae, you just said something so important because I want us to end on what we need to do next. It's funny, so many of our friends in the civil rights community for other fights have been very aggressive in terms of how they're addressing some issues. My husband, who is also a civil rights attorney, just said to me the other day, we were talking about North Carolina, and we were talking about the ways in which some of the sports leagues are addressing the fact that North Carolina is discriminating against people based on sexual orientation. And my husband looked at me and he said, okay, Miss Civil Rights Warrior. He said, why are people not saying, we're not going to bring our sports franchise to your state if you continue to disenfranchise voters with these draconian laws? So I just put that out there to say that we have to start being creative in terms of how we are thinking about addressing these issues. We lawyers have a job. Justin and his colleagues at DOJ have a job. The Congress people have a job. But the rest of us have a job too. So we have to start thinking creatively about what do we need to do to really bring these issues to the forefront, and again, to put real reforms in place. With that, Justin, I'm going to turn to you because we look to DOJ, of course, to protect voters and to ensure that the laws of the land are followed with respect to voting. We know that with the Shelby decision, that has changed the landscape in terms of what DOJ can and cannot do. Please tell us what your department is doing right now to try to help ensure that as we go into this national election, the voters are indeed protected, that their right to vote is unencumbered. Please, I think it's helpful for people to know what it is you are still able to do despite the Shelby ruling.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Nicole. And I'll get to what we are doing right now in just a minute. Before I do, I want to also express my gratitude and thanks for position on this mighty panel. I heard Barbara say that her voice was weakened before she lead into all of us. I have not heard her voice weakened yet. I've known her a long time, and it has never been weak.
That says something about the strength of her voice.
Oh, yes,
does it
it
not,
does.
Justin? If that was weak.
Oh, yes, it does. But I'm up here with a number of people with tremendously strong voices, not just today, but every day. And the leadership and talent on this dais is tremendous. So I am enormously grateful and gratified to be here. And here alongside many people that we have been fighting with in the courts, in Texas and in North Carolina most prominently, but those are just the big statewide issues. Down in smaller communities, we're there all the time, and so are they. And we very much appreciate the opportunity to work together often towards civil rights. So I'm in the leadership of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, and we have the great privilege and responsibility to be working on civil rights issues, as many speakers have mentioned, across the board. We are working on civil rights criminal justice issues, on civil rights housing issues, on civil rights employment issues, on civil rights education issues, because we know that they are all, in fact, connected. And when we are given a mandate by Congress, those are the instructions we follow in order to enforce civil rights in the country. It is not just issue by issue, they are connected. We think every day about how that is true. I have the particular privilege to be spending my waking hours and most of my sleeping hours on voting rights. When I wake up in the morning, I think about how to support voting rights and enforce our civil rights statutes. When I go to sleep at night, if I go to sleep at night, I have the privilege of sleeping on how to enforce the voting rights and civil rights statutes that have to do with voting. And there is absolutely no greater calling that I can think of to work on this enormously important issue. The Department of Justice thinks about voting rights and thinks about civil rights not just in November and president runoffs and in special elections, and that happens all the time. And each of them are important. We don't get distracted by the shiny. We are out whenever there's an election, making sure that people can vote when they're eligible, when they want to, that they have the opportunities that the law requires, that the law gives them. And this has been, I'm delighted by the way that Nicole set up this conversation, because it has been a story of obstacles and overcoming. There has been some bad news and there has been some good news of late, and you've heard other people talk about that. The bad news, Shelby County hurt us too. And it hurt us in our ability to help everybody else. The Department of Justice had the fierce protector role in reviewing laws from some of the jurisdictions with the harshest histories of discrimination before they ever took effect. And we could stop those laws when they were discriminatory before they ever took effect. And that has changed. And that's part of why you've heard just about every speaker so far mention this particular case, because it gutted an enormously powerful tool that we had at our disposal. With that, it swept some other tools alongside of it. So you know that the Department of Justice has sent out election monitors to watch elections, not just presidential elections, but municipal elections and state elections and federal elections whenever they happen, in order to make sure that the federal civil rights laws around voting are followed. By statute, we had the authority to send people out to many of the jurisdictions that were covered for pre-clearance, that had to run their election changes by us. And that too has changed after Shelby County. Shelby County hurt a lot. And we have called and continue to call for, exactly as folks here have, restoration of the Voting Rights Act. It's one of the most important issues that folks face. That said, we are working ourselves to the bone with the tools that we have to do everything in our power to enforce the laws that do still exist and enforce the capacity that does still exist. And the tide is turning, that we are winning more often, and that is very good news. That happens in court cases. It happens, as you've heard from Representative Vesey, from Janae, from others here in Texas, where we have brought back a system where people can say who they are and show that they are who they say they are without needing to show a particular form of ID that people just don't have. Part of the very powerful testimony from that Texas case, a woman named Sammy Louise Bates, on an extreme fixed income, elderly African-American, long distance from any sort of motor vehicle establishment where she could find a photo ID. She said, look, it's going to cost me $42 for a birth certificate. I got to put that $42 where it does the most good. You can't eat a birth certificate. You can't pay rent with a birth certificate. And now she can vote, even though she doesn't have to spend that money to get an ID that she doesn't otherwise use. That is power. It took way too long to get that result. We had blocked it in 2011. We joined the fight after Congressman Vesey took action in litigation in 2013. It's taken way too long to get that result. But the results are coming. And we are pledged to work as hard as we have to, as long as it takes, to get those results. In North Carolina, similar thing. We've been fighting since 2013, since that law was first passed, and have finally managed to get results. And as Janae talked about, we have to win the win, not only after the court decision comes down. We got to make sure that it is implemented in a way that provides relief to the real people there. And it is working. And with the people we're sending out as well, what are we doing in this election cycle? We are mobilizing as much as we can, using the tools available to us, to send out DOJ staff to make sure that the voting rights are followed, that the statutes are followed, with all the capacity we have. That is, it's taken more, and it's taken much heavier a lift, but we are working every day to make sure that lift actually works for voters on the ground. No matter who they're voting for, no matter what election they're voting in, that's our job. And I am delighted to be a part of that.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for your work. Congressman Vesey, before we turn it over to the audience for them to ask a few questions, please tell us, again, with a forward-looking outlook, what do folks need? What can folks do? Give us one or two charges that folks can do to help you in Congress do the job you're trying to do to reform and protect voting rights for all voters. And then Reverend Sadler, Janae, and Wade. Reverend Sadler, Janae, and Wade. If I had more time, I'd go down the row. I'm going to ask each of you to, in 30 seconds, give us a directive as to what we can do to get ready for the next administration as we work on voting rights, whomever that may be. Give us a directive, something that we can keep in our minds, because Mr. Conyers said to us earlier, he said we only have 50-some days left, but we've got to get ready, you all. We have to be forward moving. And if you don't take 30 seconds, I got my Sandman hook. It's coming out, because I want these folks to have a few minutes to ask questions. So Congressman Vesey.
Absolutely, and I'll be brief also. The thing that I will say that I think that we need to leave her with is we need to make sure that we just don't talk about this issue, when we get together once a year at Congressional Black Caucus. That's the big thing. We need to be able to, meet and talk about this on a more regular basis. And so, we need to come up with a social media strategy. We need to come up with a plan, because that's how we're really going to reach the younger people, to make them understand how important that this issue is. We're not going to reach them through the traditional, church setting or local NAACP setting. We're going to reach them here, and we're going to reach them through this. This is what they carry around with them all the time. One of the things that that we discussed a little bit earlier that I'm going to look into, is the possibility of having more conference calls and things like that, where we can talk about this regularly, where we could get me and Conyers and we can get Lacey, and we can talk about this on a more frequent basis and do conference calls and maybe try to head off some of these things before they actually become law in these various states, because we know that they're going to continue to look at different ways that they can circumvent the right to vote. So I would just leave everybody with that charge, is let's come up with something. Let's make sure that everybody has signed in and left their email addresses and things of that nature. But we need to make sure that we can, a couple of months from now, 3 months from now, have some type of forum where we'll talk again.
Thank you. Reverend Sadler, 30 seconds. What do we need to be doing to look forward to preparing for the next administration on these issues?
Wonderful question. I think first we need to empower people to recognize that there is something spiritually at stake when we deny people the right to vote. We need to embody Dr. King's campaign for the 21st century. How do we make sure we don't let that dream die? How do we make sure we don't let the legacy of sacrifices go unheralded? We need in part to begin to work together like Barbara's doing with the Voter Rights Alliance, make sure that we support groups like this, efforts like this, support the Congressional Caucus that's come together to deal with these issues. We also need to make sure that we deal with the machines. Why is it that machines always break down in the black communities? How do we make sure that we have integrity with these machines so we know that what people say they're voting for, they actually vote for? And finally, I think that we really need to make sure that we win this. We cannot afford to lose this. America's soul is at stake. We cannot be the country we claim to be if blacks aren't allowed to vote equally. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Janae.
Thank you.
All right, I have 30 seconds. So I've had 3 charges. One is turn out, but turn out with demands. Just don't show up. Show up with a demand for your elected official at the presidential level and at the local level. Amen. To fulfill. We too often turn out, but without an agenda. Let's get to the polls and also get to the people we elect with demands for accountability. We also need to tune in. Because Section 5 is no longer there, we are the eyes and ears of our democracy. We have to be the ones who demonstrate that Section 5 is still needed, and the ones to report when these local violations happen. We know about all the big ones, but we don't know when a polling place in your community was closed. We don't know when the hours of operation have shrunk. We need to know that, and we have documented so many of them in this report issued by the Legal Defense Fund, Democracy Diminished, which you can find on our website. This chronicles many of the changes that we've been able to note at the state and local levels, but there are so many more out there that we want to be aware of so that we can troubleshoot them with you. So you need to be the eyes and ears on the ground. And then finally, we need to take charge. The Voting Rights Act is ours. It was created through the blood, sweat, and tears of our people crossing the bridge with allies and others, but it was us who put forth this transformative legislation. We have to protect it. We have to take charge of the effort to get it strengthened and to push the democracy effort forward beyond that. We have continued to hold America to its ideals, and we can continue to do it now. We not only need to restore the Voting Rights Act, but we need to look for automatic voter registration. We need to push this democracy open more and make it the inclusive democracy that it should be.
Thank you. Wade.
Thank you. I'm not even sure that there's a lot to add, having heard
Then
my
drop the
colleagues.
mic.
I'm not going to do it, baby. Not yet. Not yet. Look. Wake up, guys. And as the young folks say, stay woke. Okay, stay woke. Now, I gotta say, look, voting and electoral participation, guys, are a blood sport. Okay, they are a blood sport. And the founder of the Leadership Conference, one of them was A. Philip Randolph, head of the first Black Labor Union, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. His message was simple. There are no free seats at the table of life. You get what you can take. You keep what you can hold. If you take nothing, you will keep nothing. And if you can't hold it, damn it, it's lost to you forever. Okay? Stay woke. So the bottom line is this. You got the power. You have the power. You've got to use it. Now, I am tired as a black person, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of people. I'm tired of being played. I'm tired of race being used as a device to play us. And I'm tired of it. In 1968, it was Willie Horton. And in 2016, it's demonizing Obama. That's what this is about. So, guys, you have to be bipartisan. You need the votes of both parties to do anything affirmatively. But you also have to recognize what's happening. So the Trump phenomenon, that's the bastard love child of a runaway Tea Party and a Republican Party hell-bent on delegitimizing Obama. So when people yell, "You lie," at a presidential speech and he wasn't censured, or when some crackpot Arizona governor shakes her finger in the president's face, okay, come on, wake up, stay woke. So I'm saying come to the polls, bring 5 people with you. 5 people with you. And here's the last deal. Every vote that you don't cast is a vote for your opponent, because every vote that you don't cast is going to be turned against you. So stay woke.
Thank you. He did drop the mic. He did. I am going to ask, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Brooks for a second. I'm going to ask, because we're running out of time, but I want to hear from you all. You all know there was so much good stuff that we had to get out. If you have a question, I want you to stand up now. If you have a question, I'm going to try to get to as many as I can before they give me the hook. But as you are doing that, I'm going to ask Mr. Brooks, because I have to, as the leader of the nation's oldest civil rights organization, I have to give him an opportunity to tell us what we need to be doing to get ready for this transition. Cornell.
So very quickly, in terms of the NAACP and mobilizing the vote, we've lifted up the phrase "stay woke." I should note our voter mobilization campaign is called "Stay Woke and Vote." Yesterday, Chance the Rapper, whom many millennials know, is with his world tour is supporting our voter mobilization effort. It trended on Twitter. It was a Twitter moment. We have 2.2 million digital followers, most of them young. 28% growth rate last year, mostly young. The point being here is we want to engage young people in the work of the NAACP and getting out the vote this year. Please go to our website. We have a youth engagement toolkit, church toolkits, voter mobilization toolkits, everything you need in terms of a roadmap to both support the restoration of the Voting Rights Act and massively turning out the vote. In other words, if we show up in mass, in millions, at the polls, we win. And here's why we know. We can do this. In 2012, the NAACP moved 1 million voters. Okay? There's a former state senator from Illinois who resides in the White House as a consequence of the power of our vote. We did it then. We can do it in November. There's no need for us to slip into a clinical state of depression. We know what we can do.
Thank you. I see one person standing, 2 people, but I've got to ask your indulgence because Leader Clyburn has just walked in. So have some of the members of our next panel. But here's what I'm going to do. Because I believe as a moderator in keeping folks happy. I am going to, when we start the next panel, I'm going to start with your questions, okay? Right. So you have an opportunity to get them out, and then we're going to address them because you have another set of experts coming up here, okay? I also have to say this before we leave. I got to answer that question myself. Okay, 1 second, Barbara. Thank you. Automatic universal voter registration, you just heard Janae say this. As we are talking about reforms, the Brennan Center has been pushing automatic universal voter registration. It will ensure that millions of Americans who are not on the polls will get on the voter registration rolls. We have to, again, be thinking about what kinds of reforms can we put in place so that even when the court dismantles a Section 5, we still have options available to us. So I leave you with that charge. Please join me in thanking our entire panel. Please. And Barbara is my former boss. I would turn to you, Barbara, but I just got the note saying Leader Clyburn must speak. He must speak. So I'm going to turn it over to Leader Clyburn to join us here.
Thank you, Nicole. You were amazing.
Let's give Nicole Austin Hillary and this panel a wonderful round of applause. All right, let me make a couple notes here. I'm with the foundation. The second panel is going to start shortly. Reverend Barber is on his way now. We're going to continue this conversation with panel 2. I want to thank Laura Murphy and Airbnb for their sponsorship. I'd like to thank the National Election Defense Coalition and the Voting Rights Alliance for their support. So give us about 2-3 minutes for this transition. If we can transition quietly, because I'd like to bring Leader Clyburn to the stage to make remarks. So if I can get your attention, this is the highest ranking member of Congress, right? So if I can get your attention, please. Thank you, thank you. I want to thank our first phenomenal panel. And please feel free to come fill in the seats here before I introduce Leader Clyburn.